Hello, and welcome to the fourth lecture on research methods. So we've talked about descriptive methods. We talked about just general descriptive methods, and we also talked about participant observation. So now we're going to talk about case studies. And case studies are the intense examination of one subject in detail. Now we only use case studies in certain situations. We only use them to study the rare, the unusual, the exceptional, or extreme behaviors or phenomenon. If something's not rare or unusual or extreme, we need to use other research methodologies to study it. So let's say we're going to research dissociative identity disorder, and that's the current diagnostic title for multiple personality disorder. So few people have DID that we can't create a pool of subjects to study. That there's just not enough people with DID to make that possible. And so what we do is we use case studies. Now, case studies help us define what is typical. So what's typical behavior and what's atypical behavior. One of the things about case studies is that interpretation can be subjective. Now, this is where having a scientific community becomes a great thing. When you publish your case study, other scientists can look at your work and say, I think you missed a point when you're discussing this symptom, or I think you misinterpreted X, Y, and Z. Now, there's something called case study research, and this is the analysis of many case studies involving a similar behavior or phenomenon. So in graduate school, I did a case study research project on dissociative identity disorder. Fascinating. It was fascinating. This brings us to our fourth descriptive methodology, surveys, interviews, and questionnaires. Actually, this is our third one, sorry. So with surveys, interviews, and questionnaires, this is where we're using a structured set of questions that are used with all subjects. Now, what's great is this allows us to research hundreds of subjects rather than just 100 or 300. We can reach out to thousands of subjects and do a really huge study. Survey interviews and questionnaires are efficient, they're fast, they're affordable, and you can reach a really broad group of subjects. Let me check my next slide. So when I was in graduate school, I was working at one of the laboratories in the sociology department, and they were doing a phone survey, and the target was 3,000 subjects. So yes, I was one of those annoying people that calls and asks you for your thoughts and opinions on things. And I was actually really good at it. But, not an easy job. However, there's no other way that we could reach 3,000 Americans throughout the country to give us a broad demographics if we try to do another different type of methodology. We had to use survey interviews and questionnaires. It just is a lot easier to research a large number of subjects. Now, these methodologies allow us to just directly ask people about their thoughts and their behaviors. Now, we make our questionnaires, interviews, and surveys very structured so that everyone's getting asked the same questions in the same order, the same way. One of the issues with surveys, questionnaires, and interviews is that this is self-report data. So we're asking people to share their thoughts and opinions with us. As I said, we all want to be helpful with research, which is one of the reasons we become subjects. It's going to be interesting. Let's help science. But you're being watched, and people skew their answers when it comes to this kind of thing because they believe they should be seen in a certain light. We all do that. We do that in our everyday lives. But when it comes to science, we need data to be as accurate as possible. We can't control for subjects being misleading. Sometimes they don't know they're being misleading. But we do have to realize that, okay, if this data is simply self-report, you need to keep that in mind. Now, the more subjects you reach in a study, the more you can help overcome that self-report data bias. We have to be culturally sensitive when we're using surveys, questionnaires, and interviews. So cultural sensitivity recognizes that there are differences among people from different cultural groups and different language backgrounds. So if I am doing research on Muslim women, I'm not going to ask a man to go into the interview room one-on-one with a Muslim woman. I don't know that specific Muslim woman's beliefs about being alone with an unrelated male. I do know in Islam that can be a very big issue. I need to be culturally sensitive to the possibility of that being a big issue. Just one of many examples. And then we get to correlational studies. And with correlational studies, we're looking at how variables are related in the real world. Now, correlational studies never show causality. They cannot tell you that smoking causes lung cancer. And I'll come back to that example in a moment. All a correlational study can do is tell you that how related two variables are and what direction or how does that relationship work. So with this, we're not manipulating variables. There is an issue we have to watch out for, though. So with correlational studies, we're looking at two different variables. Sometimes you encounter a third variable as you're doing the study or as you're crunching your numbers. Oh, you know it skewed your research. You either have to start over, you can publish with the acknowledgement that there was a third variable that was unexpected. That's okay. You can publish as long as you acknowledge it. It's a big pain in the butt, though. So I'm going to give you some examples to explain this more. So please go watch the videos Correlation and Causation and the dangers of mixing up causality and correlation. Welcome back. These two videos do a great job of explaining how just because two variables are related doesn't mean they cause each other. And I think in research we always want to know the cause. We can't always determine that. There's another type of methodology we can use to look at cause and effect. But correlational studies, we cannot establish cause and effect with them. So a correlation coefficient. I know, I'm going to say statistics, and you math phobics are going to get a little nervous, but don't worry. There's going to be numbers, but you don't have to do anything. You just have to understand the concept. So a correlational coefficient is a descriptive statistic that describes the strength and direction of the relationship between two variables. So we're just looking at relationships. And again, correlations do not prove cause and effect, ever. They can't. Correlations only show a relationship between two variables. Now, a correlational coefficient is a statistic and that gives us information about the nature of the relationship between variables. So a correlational coefficient is expressed along a continuum from negative 1.0 all the way to positive 1.0. And that the number, and I'll go more into this, just tells us about the type of relationship and the strength of the relationship. So if you have something that is positive 0.7 or higher, that's a really strong correlation. If something is 0.5, either way, plus or minus 0.5, that means there's a moderate to weak, but a weak correlation is 0.5 or less. Anything at 0.5 or less is really just, it's not very noteworthy, I guess. So a positive correlation means that when one variable increases, the other variable increased. A negative correlation means that when one variable increased, the other variable decreased. I'm about to give you examples. So, positive correlation. If variable 1 goes up, that means variable 2 went up also. So a positive correlation just means the variables are going in the same direction. One goes up, the other goes up, one goes down, the other goes down. A negative correlation is when the variables go in opposite directions. And I'll show you what this means in just a sec. Now, we plot out correlational coefficients on a scatter plot. And you did this in high school and maybe some of your college classes, where each response, each incident gets mapped on a scatter plot. The scatter plots are interesting because they tell us the direction of the relationship, whether it's positive or negative. So here we have a perfect positive correlation. Here we have a perfectly negative correlation. Here we've got kind of a moderate medium. Here we have no correlation at all. You cannot find a line of best fit in here. So with a medium positive correlation, I can still find some line of best fit. I can do that with a medium negative correlation as well. But with no correlation, there is no line of best fit. So what does this mean? Okay, so here we go. First year college grade point average and total SAT scores. Would you say that this is a strong, moderate, or weak correlation? It's a moderate correlation. So, finding a line of best fit isn't easy. It's there, but it's not going to give us, a nice straight line. What they have found, so with this, it's a positive correlation because it's going in this direction. What this means is that there was a correlation between first year grade point averages and SAT scores. So the higher the grade point average, the better the student did on SATs in general. We are finding that the SATs are not a good predictor of college performance. And that's for all kinds of reasons. So here we have a moderate positive correlation. When SAT scores were higher, the first year college grade point was higher. Those two variables moved together. Grade point and hours of studying per week. This is a very strong positive correlation. It is easy to find your line of best fit here. So the higher your grade point average, the more hours you studied per week. Here we have grade point average and the hours of TV watched per week. Here we've got a strong negative correlation. Easy to find the line of best fit. So the higher the grade point average, the less likely that you watched much TV. Grade point and number of apples consumed each week, there is no correlation. I dare you to find a line of best fit in there. You can't, because there's no correlation between how many apples you eat and your grade point average. So, review that in your textbook. I had to go kind of fast. The audio recorder only lets me do 15 minutes at a time. So review correlations in your textbook. Just make sure you're clear about it. See you on lecture 2.5.